Imagine standing on a cold, jagged spike of rock, 70 miles off the brutal northwest coast of Scotland. This is the Flannan Isles, the ultimate edge of the world, and the home of a lighthouse that demanded total obedience from the men who kept its light alive. For them, isolation wasn't a risk, it was the entire job description. The sea around those islands is not water, it's an unforgiving force, churning perpetually, intent on reclaiming every inch of human construction. Life here was measured not in days, but in schedules. Strict, unforgiving routines were the only thing that kept three men sane, replacing the mental strain of total loneliness with the rigid comfort of predictability. They were a trio bound by extreme hardship, creating a fierce camaraderie born from the certainty that the outside world had forgotten them. I always think about the tiny details that kept them connected to humanity. There was the heavy, weather-beaten pocket watch, always consulted by one keeper, marking the endless march of time he couldn't escape. And the small, homemade model ship, a miniature vessel forever stuck on the lighthouse window ledge, a silent, defiant symbol of comfort against the raging tempest. But even those small comforts couldn't extinguish the psychological dread of the place. Whispers followed the wind. Rumors among lighthouse men spoke of ancient curses tied to those exact, desolate rocks. A history of darkness that predated the tower itself. Picture this. It's a stormy evening. The rain is horizontal, sounding like gunfire against the stone. Inside the thick tower walls, the three keepers are gathered, their voices raised slightly to be heard over the continuous, deafening roar of the Atlantic. They are telling stories, maybe sharing a meal, following their rigid schedule, totally dependent on each other for survival. They had faced weeks, months, years of this life. They were prepared for weather, for loneliness, for the mental challenges. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could prepare them for what happened next. The storm would pass, but the silence that followed would unleash a mystery that still echoes more than 100 years later. Who were the men who vanished? They weren't rookies or troublemakers. They were three of the most skilled, disciplined lighthouse keepers in the service: James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur. Ducat, the principal keeper, was the veteran. His logbook entries were legendary, meticulous, precise, almost obsessively ordered. He embodied the rock-steady dependability the service demanded. Marshall, the first assistant, was perhaps the most sensitive. It's said he often carried a book of poetry, trying to find beauty in the endless gray monotony. And then there was MacArthur, the second assistant, known for his quiet, almost stoic bravery. He was the relief man, there to fill in for a rotating colleague. They were professional, respected, and they knew the dangers of the Atlantic intimately. But put three strong, isolated men together in a stone tower 70 miles from civilization, and human friction is inevitable. We know from later inquiries that there were whispers of tension. A rumored disagreement had flared up between Marshall and MacArthur just days before the disappearance. A dispute over maintenance duties, perhaps, magnified tenfold by the suffocating isolation. Was it just a petty argument forgotten by morning, or was it something deeper? The most chilling detail that surfaces immediately is what was not in order: a small domestic anomaly. When the rescue crew finally arrived, they found a chair in the keeper's lounge, overturned. That detail, that simple piece of furniture lying on its side, screams of a sudden, instant disruption of their ironclad routine. Why does that matter? Lighthouse keepers don't leave overturned chairs. They don't leave things undone. That small, chaotic detail suggests that whatever happened was fast. Did the argument boil over? Did one of them snap? Were they hiding a secret they couldn't possibly keep under the endless scrutiny of the lighthouse watch? The question isn't if they were professionals. They were. The question is, what kind of event or what kind of threat could force three highly disciplined men to abandon their posts and leave a domestic scene looking like a fight had just ended? The official timeline begins in early December of the year 1900. These were the final entries in the Flannan Isles logbook, written by men who had no idea they were documenting their own final days. The entries, usually dull records of oil consumption and cloud cover, started to betray a growing anxiety. They spoke of the weather, of course, but not just the usual harsh gales. They mentioned unexpectedly large waves battering the cliffs and, more chillingly, strange noises offshore. What kind of noises? Something loud enough to warrant notation? Something that wasn't the usual scream of the wind? But the most famous and most deeply unsettling entry was found near the end. It was short, desperate, and completely out of character for the meticulous principal keeper, Ducat. It read simply, "God help us." This single sentence changes everything. It flips the narrative from a simple maritime accident into something far more sinister. Was it a prayer of despair born from the isolation, or a cry for help against an immediate, unseen threat? When the relief crew finally arrived and entered the tower, the atmosphere was frozen in time. On the table, a partially eaten meal remained, perfectly preserved. Imagine that moment. The men were preparing to eat, perhaps mid-sentence, when they simply stopped. This wasn't a planned departure. It was an abrupt cessation of normal life. If the meal was preserved, it means they vanished instantly, without having time to clear the table, put on their full gear, or finish the log. The only thing left behind was a profound, shocking silence. What could possibly tear three seasoned professionals from their dinner table and out into the terrifying fury of the North Atlantic? Was it a rogue wave, a storm surge beyond comprehension? Or was it the answer hinted at by the fishermen who claimed, just days earlier, to have seen something, a ghostly presence hovering near the rocks? We are moving past the weather now and into the impossible. The date was December 26, 1900, Boxing Day. The relief ship, the Hesperus, arrived at the Flannan Isles. The captain, Jim Harvey, noticed the first anomaly immediately. The flagpole was bare. No flag flew in the bracing wind. Worse, the light was out. The relief keeper, Joseph Moore, was the man tasked with climbing the cliffs to reach the entrance. What he found immediately sent a cold spike of fear through him. The gate was locked. The main door of the lighthouse was locked from the outside. Moore entered. The silence was not just the absence of sound. It was a deafening vacuum where three men's lives should have been playing out. Every bed was neatly made, untouched since the last shift. On the table, the remnants of that meal sat waiting. And there it was again, the small, jarring detail of the overturned chair. It suggested violence, or at least extreme haste. Moore's search revealed another critical piece of evidence. The men's oilskins, their heavy weather gear, were hanging on their hooks, protected from the weather. Except for one set. One set of oilskins was missing. Think about that. Two men left their gear behind, meaning they went outside without adequate protection. But one man did take his. This wasn't a coordinated rescue attempt. This suggests one keeper went out, realized the immense danger, and then the other two followed, perhaps spontaneously and desperately, trying to help. The lighthouse lamp itself was clean, polished, and ready for lighting, suggesting the men had finished their evening duties before whatever happened took place. Yet the entire structure felt wrong. As the crew searched the small, desolate island, the wind howled, amplifying the chilling emptiness. They found nothing. No body, no note, no struggle, except for that single overturned chair. What kind of terror could make two seasoned men run into a ferocious Atlantic storm without even grabbing their coats? The sheer dread of that impossible disappearance started to creep into the hearts of the search party, morphing a simple search and rescue into the most haunting mystery in maritime history. But their official investigation was only just beginning. The shockwave of the disappearance finally reached the Northern Lighthouse Board, and an official inquiry was launched immediately. Captain Harvey of the Hesperus and the relief keeper Joseph Moore gave their damning reports. 3 men gone, no bodies, and a scene inside the tower that defied all logic. The inquiry had to offer an answer, a rationale strong enough to close the file. The official finding settled on what seemed, superficially, the most plausible natural cause: a massive storm and a rogue wave. The theory was this: a sudden, colossal wave, perhaps 100 feet high, struck the landing platform. One man ran out to secure equipment that had come loose, and the others followed quickly in a desperate attempt to save him, or perhaps save the entire winch system, only to be swept away themselves. It's a neat answer. It explains the missing oil skins, the urgency, and the sudden abandonment of dinner. But listen to this. No bodies were ever recovered. No debris from their equipment was found. Even after the worst storms, the sea usually gives something back. The sea here gave nothing. The lack of evidence was compounded by a powerful piece of counter-evidence that the Lighthouse Board actively suppressed. The relief keeper, Joseph Moore, later wrote a secret letter to a friend. In it, he expressed his deep, visceral suspicion of foul play. He couldn't shake the feeling that the keepers hadn't been killed by the sea, but that something terrible had happened inside the tower before they even went outside. The official inquiry was forced to consider alternatives: suicide driven by the brutal isolation, sabotage by a hostile vessel, a violent quarrel that ended in murder followed by self-disposal. Every theory had a hole the size of the Atlantic Ocean in it. How could 3 seasoned men vanish simultaneously without leaving a single tangible trace of what killed them? The inquiry ultimately failed to provide a definitive answer. They closed the case on accident, but the real mystery, the terrifying, intimate detail of the overturned chair and the untouched meal, remained completely unexplained. And that's why, over 100 years later, this story still haunts us. The official inquiry settled on the rogue wave, but let's be honest, that's the rational answer, not necessarily the true one. The evidence for the storm theory is compelling, I have to admit. When the relief crew examined the western landing platform, they saw the undeniable impact of massive water force. Iron railings were bent, and a large metal crane, meant for hoisting supplies, was twisted beyond recognition. High tide marks were found far higher up the tower than was ever normal. The sea certainly visited the Flannan Isles with unimaginable force. But how could a wave sweep 3 men away without taking their hats, their boots, or leaving any bloodstain or sign of struggle? That lack of physical evidence forces us away from the purely rational and toward the truly eerie. The Flannan Isles have a history as dark as their rocks. Long before the lighthouse was built, the local folklore was thick with tales of ancient curses, restless spirits, and spectral apparitions. Lighthouse keepers, by nature, are a superstitious lot, and the deep loneliness of that tower was fertile ground for dread. One persistent, unverified story, a powerful one, regardless of its truth, claims that the crew of a passing vessel reported seeing strange, ghostly lights flickering around the Flannan Isles just days before the Hesperus arrived. Were these just weather phenomena, or was this a harbinger of the darkness that consumed the men? Skeptics will always favor the simple, devastating power of the Atlantic storm. But those who believe in the unknown cling to the more chilling whispers, like the fleeting rumor that one of the initial search party members claimed to have glimpsed a mysterious black figure standing high on the cliffs, only for it to vanish instantly into the mist. A figure not human, not animal, just darkness. Whether it was a natural disaster or a supernatural event, one thing is certain: the Flannan Isles are still holding a secret that 3 men took to their grave, or rather, took into the vast, indifferent ocean. And the next set of theories tries to bring the mystery back down to earth, even if the result is even darker. The vanishing of Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur wasn't just a loss of 3 lives, it was a devastating blow to the entire maritime community. It shattered the proud, if isolated, brotherhood of lighthouse keepers across Scotland. For the Northern Lighthouse Board, it was an operational disaster that necessitated immediate, drastic change. Safety protocols were completely overhauled. They began mandating doubled watch shifts and implementing better communication systems, trying desperately to engineer human error, or unexplained vanishing, out of existence. The board effectively admitted that the old system, which relied solely on the iron discipline of 3 men, was fatally flawed. Imagine the keepers who followed them. They didn't just take a job, they inherited a ghost story. Their work was now shadowed by the ultimate question: what if it happens to me? I can imagine their anxiety, perhaps writing in their own secret journals, a new keeper jotting down that every flicker of the lamp reminds him of the night the light went out forever, and the silence in the kitchen feels heavier than the Atlantic storm. The tragedy cemented the Flannan Isles mystery into legend. It inspired endless speculation, but also art. It became a cultural touchstone for inexplicable dread. Books were written, and poets immortalized the 3 missing men. There's a heartbreaking ballad known as The Long-Staffed Lighthouse, rumored to have been penned by a grieving relative, capturing the terrible finality of the men simply ceasing to be. The Flannan Isles lighthouse kept shining, but it was never the same. It was a beacon of light built on a foundation of unanswered questions, a constant, silent memorial to 3 disciplined men who simply walked into thin air. But we still have the logs, and a deep dive into the keeper's own words gives us a final, tantalizing glimpse into their mental state right before they disappeared. A mystery this perfect cannot die, it only changes form. From the moment the Hesperus reported the emptiness of the lighthouse, the story was weaponized by the press. Early 20th century newspapers didn't just report the facts, they sensationalized them, spinning tales of sea monsters, insanity, and murder. The Flannan Isles became shorthand for the ultimate, terrifying vanishing act. But the story transcended mere sensationalism and entered the realm of high drama and high art. In 2019, the story hit the big screen with the film The Vanishing, which focused heavily on the rumored interpersonal tension and the possibility of murder, locking the keepers into a psychological horror scenario. This film and countless podcasts and documentaries revived the tale for a modern audience obsessed with true crime and the unexplained. It's worth noting that the mystery continues to inspire local emotional responses. There is an original, deeply moving painting held in a private Scottish collection, created by an artist from the nearby islands, that attempts to capture the 3 men's terrifying last moments, depicting shadows and impossible walls of water. It shows how profoundly this event marked the collective imagination. What the public latches onto are the powerful, poetic images. They vanished into sea mists, taken by the very waves they fought. We prefer the drama of the impossible to the banality of bureaucratic accident reports. The logbook entry, "God help us," becomes a declaration of war against the unknown, not just a line in a shipping document. The tragedy's longevity isn't due to clear answers, it's due to the complete lack of them. Every writer, every filmmaker, every podcaster gets to fill that vast empty space with their own greatest fear. And that is why the Flannan Isles are more famous for the 3 men who disappeared than for the countless sailors they saved. But the most potent versions of the story are those that combine the known facts with the wildest theories. And we need to look at the three most compelling and most terrifying proposed solutions. Today, we tackle the Flannan Isles mystery with technology the original inquiry couldn't dream of. Modern oceanography, using advanced historical weather reconstructions, has confirmed that the storm preceding the discovery was catastrophic. The probability of a rogue wave, a monumental surge of water far bigger than surrounding waves, was statistically very high near those cliffs in early December. The math supports the natural disaster theory. Furthermore, psychological profiles of men working in extreme isolation show that mental fatigue and rapid, panicked decision-making are real dangers. The hypothesis that one keeper rushed out without his oilskins, perhaps seeing the winch or crane suddenly dragged away by a wave, and the other two, realizing the extreme danger and the necessity of immediate action, followed him instantly, is plausible. It becomes a tragedy of heroism, not disappearance. However, the scientific analysis only takes us so far. It can't explain the overturned chair. It can't explain the absolute lack of debris. Where did the bodies go? If they were swept into the Atlantic, some piece of clothing, some scrap of boot leather should have eventually returned to shore, even hundreds of miles away. The evidence gap is still massive. I often imagine a modern drone flying over the desolate island today, silently capturing the unmoving, silent stone of the lighthouse. It stands there, defiant against time, a perfect cylinder of human engineering, yet utterly dwarfed by the environment it was meant to conquer. The drone's sensors analyze the wind, the sea, the stone, looking for some forgotten clue the human eye missed a century ago. It finds nothing. The lighthouse stands, but its silence screams. We've explored the facts, the logs, the theories, and the cultural impact. Now it's time to offer the three strongest potential conclusions and let you decide which fate sealed the end for Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur. More than 100 years later, why does the vanishing of the Flannan Isles keepers still claw at our collective subconscious? Because it challenges our deepest assumption that civilization, routine, and discipline can protect us from the abyss. Three highly professional men in the safest possible structure simply cease to exist, leaving only a half-eaten meal and an overturned chair. The ocean, that vast, inscrutable entity, swallowed the evidence, denying us the one thing we crave most: closure. We need to know if they were heroes, victims of a perfect storm, or perhaps something far darker, victims of their own internal collapse. The sheer, overwhelming loneliness of their post remains a potent metaphor for human vulnerability. My personal interpretation leans toward tragic heroism. I believe the overturned chair was caused by the immediate alarm of the principal keeper, Ducat, realizing that something catastrophic was happening outside, perhaps a vital piece of equipment being destroyed by an unexpectedly high swell. One man raced out in his oilskins to save the light's integrity. The other two followed, running to save their comrade, knowing they had mere seconds before the sea claimed everything. They weren't fighting for their lives, they were fighting for the light. But regardless of whether you believe in a giant wave, a murderous secret, or the ancient curse of the Flannan Rocks, the final image is always the same: a beam of light shining in the middle of nowhere, powered by men who were never seen again. Think about the modern keepers who eventually automated the tower. Even they carried the shadow of that night. Picture a keeper today, perhaps alone during a ferocious storm, the last keeper before the automation fully took hold. He's standing by the window, the modernized light sweeping over the black, roaring waves. The wind is screaming the names of Ducat, Marshall, and MacArthur. He raises a glass of whiskey in the profound, echoing silence, a silent toast to the trio who gave everything, even their bodies, to keep the light alive. The light burns on, a testament to their service. But the ultimate chilling truth of what happened remains 70 miles offshore, locked within the cold, black heart of the Atlantic. Let me know what you believe happened in the comments below. Was it the sea, madness, or something else entirely? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deep dives into the world's most haunting mysteries.